Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode. Today, I'm joined once again, but I will be calling him a veteran of the channel at this point, Rich Laverty. How are you doing today?
I'm good. How are you?
Very, very well. How has it been post World Cup and post WSL transfer window for you?
Yeah, I mean, it's always busy. Like, there's always something going on. Like, as soon as the World Cup ends, you turn your attention to something else. Like, I think I saw this morning, it's a month since the final. Um, it feels like a lot longer.
It does.
Um, yeah, there's obviously the end of the transfer window was pretty busy as well. So, but it's like I can't complain. Like I keep saying, I like it when it's busy and there's
Yeah.
things going on. So. It's yeah, it's sometimes a little bit too busy, but no, it's generally been all good.
That's good. It's always great to wake up and have a busy day, and I assume on deadline day and the WSL transfer window, you just do not know what you're signing in yourself for. So let's talk a little bit about the transfer window. Definitely a very interesting one that certainly massively saw big names come into the WSL, but also names within the WSL. Any specific patterns that you saw this year that were maybe a little bit different than previous years in terms of just the names or the numbers that you saw going around? With a World Cup year, I feel like transfer windows are always very interesting because there are certain names that you would have never guessed would come over to a certain team prior to the World Cup, and then afterwards, you're seeing Cooney Cross get a bid in mid-season for her in Sweden from Arsenal on deadline day. So, how was that transfer window for you? I guess in the league from your perspective.
I think that was one of the things. Obviously, you mentioned Cooney Cross there at the end. Like, I think teams now are willing to spend that amount of money. Um, I think before they would have probably just waited until January.
Mm-hmm.
I think this was quite unique in that teams maybe didn't necessarily want to wait until January because she was a very coveted player and they knew there'd be probably somewhat of an auction. But, for Arsenal to go and drop the money that they did, like it was significant money for a player that is
Mm-hmm.
essentially only 3 months away from being a free agent. But
Yeah.
I think that showed how much they want her, but that clubs can now do that. The top clubs can do it anyway. I think the World Cup did have an effect. Like you saw some moves off the back of that I don't think would have happened otherwise, i.e., someone like Miyazawa, obviously, to Manchester United. But,
Mm-hmm.
good moves as well. I mean, like, West Ham picking up Ueki, who was, Japan's number nine at times
Yeah.
during that tournament. And West Ham, one of the sort of bottom half clubs in the WSL. And I think that shows definitely the strength of the league. Obviously, that even the clubs near the bottom end are picking up strikers that were playing at the World Cup. So um, I think it has progressed, but I think there's been elements that the World Cup has played in it, but I think more than anything, I think it's just natural progression of the game and the finances and obviously the interest in the WSL as well.
Yeah, I like how you mentioned that now Arsenal or teams like that are willing to put in big money when they could have gone her, they could have waited a few more months to get a player on free agency. But that's kind of where the game is going. Teams are able to put in big sums of money, which, shows massive progression of how the teams are able to build their teams. Is there a team that stood out to you in terms of their transfers that maybe they'll be able to achieve something this season that they didn't last season? And, I love to hear if you thought so from maybe the top three or four teams and maybe even a team in the mid table. Like for example, I think Leicester City won't, in my opinion, don't think will be really thrown into a relegation battle this season. Whereas that's kind of been the story since they were in the WSL. So looking at the teams as a whole, is there a few teams that you're really happy to see change certain players, bring in players, Lego certain players? How did that look for you for a few of those teams?
I think I'm always impressed. I think you can always see the teams that are organized, that know what they want. You take the two teams from last season that obviously went into the title race, obviously in the final day. Chelsea went straight out and said, "Look, we've won the league, we've won the FA Cup, but we're not here to mess around." Obviously, they want to win the Champions League, and they go straight out and they get Ashley Lawrence and they get Katerina Macario. And I just think that's such a statement. to go out and do that, when you just had the success that you had. Whereas, Man United, it was a little bit more scrambling around late in the window,
Yeah.
four deals on deadline day, and you're like, it's not the ideal preparation. I think Arsenal's window was solid. I don't think it was spectacular. Manchester City, I mean, they were pretty open that,
Hmm.
they were only ever going to bring one player in. And obviously it was Jill Rhodes. So I think I'll be interested to see how they do because like they're very much an evolution of last season where there was massive changes in the squad.
Mm.
Um, I like what Brighton have done. I think they're very much following on the mantle of how impressive the men's team has been in what they've done the last few years, in that they have a structure that they stick to.
Hmm.
Um, I think you saw the impact Mel Phillips had last year when she came in
Yeah.
towards the end of the season. And it's been really impressive, to get people like Paulina Bremer, to get Vicky Losada, to get Tatiana, Tatiana Pinto had
Hmm.
Arsenal and Man United chasing her at one point. So I think for them to pick her up, I just think how they've done it is so good. Their facilities are incredible that they have down there as well. And I'm not saying they'll push like top four or anything,
Yeah.
but I think they'll be solid. I think Aston Villa again had another solid window in that they held on to key players. They held on to Rachel Daly, for example, but they
Hmm.
brought Kirsty Hansen back permanently. I really like that they've added Ebony Salmon, who I'm a massive fan of.
Hmm.
Adriana Leon's got quality, so they've brought Van Domselaar in goal. So
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, look, it's ultra competitive, and if you're not keeping up with that, you're going to fall behind. And I think you can point to a lot of clubs that have had impressive transfer windows. But
Hmm.
I said this on another podcast last week. It doesn't matter what you do, you got to make it work on the pitch. And that's the beauty of it. There's a lot of glamour names. I mean, you mentioned even Leicester. Leicester have brought players in that you couldn't have probably imagined them bringing in a couple of years ago when you're talking about players that have won the Champions League from Lyon. Um, but you got to make it work at the end of the day. So it will be very interesting. And I do think there'll be a couple of clubs probably maybe wishing they'd done a little bit more.
Mm.
Um, but, there is still only one relegation spot. So if one team sinks, then the others will get away with it. But I do think generally a lot of clubs had some very strong transfer windows.
Agreed. That would be also my very similar thoughts in terms of it was across the table. We saw great additions. Maybe like you mentioned, City was one of the quietest, but it's almost like they're trying to deal with the massive overhaul that they had the season before. And it's
Mm.
kind of like, right, let's put all the pieces together that we have. We just need to make sure it's all well oiled. You mentioned one relegation spot. There's obviously always that big question of a team that gets promoted from the championship. Their main goal is not to get relegated. It was Liverpool last season. They did pretty well not to draw themselves in a relegation battle. This season, it's Bristol City. How have you seen Bristol City kind of manage the summer in terms of, right, they're back in the WSL. There's some pretty big dogs they're going up against. Teams are strengthening, other teams maybe not so much. But for them, how have you reacted to what Bristol has been doing behind the scenes preparing for WSL return?
Uh, I think it's tough. I think, and again, this comes back to the sort of the one up, one down thing. Like
Mm.
you are coming into a league where every single other team has at least 1 year's experience in the league, and so Liverpool was a little bit of an outlier in that
Yeah.
they should probably never have been down where they were in the first place. I don't think they were ever going to go back up and be a relegation struggler particularly.
Hmm.
Uh, it is hard because we mentioned some of the clubs that you would probably put down as their sort of perceived rivals, and like you say, West Ham, bringing in, their attack is a Japanese international forward and a French international forward
Hmm.
in Viviana Asai. So,
Yeah.
Leicester bringing in Janice Cayman, Lena Petterman, I mean, even, again, go back to Aston Villa, Villa were in the championship. They only got promoted 3 years ago.
Mm.
And now they've got Rachel Daly and Jordan Nobbs and Kenza Darley and Ebony Salmon and Van Domselaar. And you're like, they were in the championship 3 years ago. Like, it's incredible. And that's how quickly you can improve. If you come up and you're lucky enough to have that season where someone else is struggling more than you. Like Villa had a tough season when they first came up,
Yeah.
but they had Birmingham, they had Liverpool who were really struggling at that point, and they managed to survive and they built from there. I think if you can come up and survive happy days, you can build, but
Yeah.
it's really tough. And I don't see a team for Bristol where you look at someone and go, there's an obvious team there that is going to sink this season. So,
Hmm.
uh, it's hard. Like
It is.
I haven't seen enough quality in who they've signed. Like,
Hmm.
but it's hard. You know, they come up from the Championship. It's hard to sign the big international players that West Ham
Yeah.
are doing and Leicester are doing because they've been doing it for a couple of years now. So you have to rely on your coaching. You have to rely on being solid. I mean, they lost West Ham 3-0 in a friendly last week, which, not a great sign, but it's quite a young squad as well. So yeah, I think it'd be tough. I think the one thing that will work for them is they've had a massive gap because the championship ended at the end of April. It ended
Yeah.
a month before the WSL. So I know Bristol went back into pre-season mega early. I think they were back almost as the WSL was ending. So like they've had a really long pre-season
Mm.
to work and to get things together. So that may help, but I do think it'll be a tough season for them. I do. I just think I don't think the one up, one down helps the team coming up. I don't.
Yeah.
I think that needs changing because if you've got another team coming up with you,
Hmm.
at least somebody else is in the same boat. I just think going into a league where everyone else is already established and you're the newcomer is really difficult. I really do. So I'd like that to change, but that's a
Yeah.
whole other story.
Yeah.
But yeah, I do think it'll be tough for Bristol.
That is certainly very interesting. It's always been seen that like when this team gets up, it's they're thrown in a water of sharks and they're kind of like that little
Mm,
pretty dolphin that's somehow trying to survive with it. And I guess a similar conversation to this is like what we saw with Reading last season was a massive struggle because their men's backing wasn't there for the Premier League. Obviously, Leicester City is maybe in the situation this season. How much does that, how, I guess how relevant is that conversation or that context when you look at the WSL teams and say they don't have that Premier League backing? Is it a worry? Is it that Reading has? I mean, I honestly was surprised to see how long Reading was in the WSL given the men's club situation. But as the game continues to grow and as we see this big team strengthen, and you will obviously talk about a conversation of parity, which again is for another chat. But Premier League backing and how relevant is that going to be, if at all, this season? And again, I guess I don't follow the Premier League so much. Is Bristol City in the Premier League, or are they in the are they in the Premier League? The men's?
no, they're not. So, I mean, yeah, it is another part of it. I mean, don't get me wrong, even championship clubs in the men's game,
Mm,
they're pretty financially secure. Like, but yeah, I mean, look, if you've got Premier League money coming down, it's tough. I mean, Bristol are the only non-Premier League team in the WSL essentially now, and they've taken Reading's place in doing that. I think what's interesting when you look at the teams now in the WSL, it's not just the Premier League, it's almost the top half of the Premier League when you look at Arsenal, Brighton, Villa, Chelsea, Everton, Liverpool, City, United,
mm,
Tottenham, they're all teams that regularly are kind of in the top half of the Premier League. Like they're not even strugglers. Like Everton struggled last year. Obviously, Leicester went down, but
yeah.
uh, yeah, it's tough. I mean, look, Leicester have still invested this summer, despite the fact the men got relegated.
Hmm.
I think, the budgets at the end of the day are a drop in the ocean, but look, it's always going to go that way where the rich get richer and
Yeah.
they rise to the top because that's just where the money is. It's like any sport.
Yeah.
And full credit to Bristol, they've come back and they've got great facilities. I've been down there and the training ground that they've got now, it's only a couple of years old, is ultra modern and has everything they need. But yeah, it, they can't spend what Chelsea are spending
Yeah.
and what Arsenal are spending, but that's the same in the men's game,
Hmm.
So, but obviously it's a lot more compact in that, yeah, they're in the WSL and in the men's game, they don't have to compete with those teams. In the women's game now this season, they do. Um, and yeah, it's um, it's tough. So yeah, it's another element. Don't get me wrong. I think you can compete if you're not a Premier League side, but
Uh-huh.
it certainly helps to be a Premier League team, I think, these days.
It massively helps. But yeah, with Reading and kind of one team coming in, one team going out, that budget you get to talk about. And moving away a little bit from budgets and transfer windows, we did touch on the World Cup, and let's touch on how do you think the World Cup would have affected the WSL. Noted that England made it to the final. Where we saw how massive that was of the backing of the Euros that was at home, so maybe the context is slightly different, but we saw the massive numbers that the World Cup was able to pull in globally, but also from UK viewers. England made it to the final, and like it was a massive achievement, and with the whole Serena Wiegman aura, and given the challenges that England had to go through with the injuries, what do you hope to see in terms of stands, tickets, audience numbers? I guess the game in general. How is it going to be affected in England off this backing, and what do you hope to see?
Uh, I hope to see I hope to see people sustain their interest in it. I think there's a lot of people that come in for the big games and the England games and things like that, but they're playing tomorrow obviously against Scotland and it's sold out and things like that. But how do we regularly get WSL games sold out where we're only playing in stadiums that host a couple of thousand people and we're not selling them out?
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's committing to the game as a whole. I think it's as well the media side of it, read more, interact more, with the media and what we're doing because we're trying to push it more. And there's people that want more coverage, but it goes hand in hand. People have to read it and interact with it. I think we live in a society where people just sort of want to read a headline and,
Mm-hmm.
you know, read the tweet and then that's kind of it rather than click an article. I think everyone wants sort of short form information. But yeah, just, you know, watch the games, and people say, oh, we want more games on TV. Well, watch them because at the end of the day, if the TV companies see that the figures are going up, they'll show more games. If the FA player sees that people are watching the FA player, they'll show more games. It's supply and demand. It always has been.
Yeah,
Um, so yeah, just fully commit to it. Don't just turn up. And this is not criticizing anybody because I know there's a lot of people that do, but
sure.
go and watch your local club, because it's great. You
It
can
is
meet
great.
you can meet the players and you
Yeah,
can interact with them and
yeah.
obviously I work for Sheffield United. We had a home game on Sunday and all the girls they were going down the stand and signing autographs and taking pictures and I said to some of the guys who work at the stadium, I said this just doesn't happen in men's games and that's not because the men don't want to interact. It's because there's 30,000 people in the stadium. But it's lovely, all seeing the young girls and everyone getting their autographs and pictures taken and stuff, because you can do that still.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so yeah, just if you've got a local club, whether it's WSL, Championship, Tier 3, 4, 5, 6, whatever, go and support them, give them your money because it's the only way the game is going to grow. Like it's not going to grow people sitting at home. Like it's only going to grow with investment, but not just investment from companies and sponsors, but from fans and from the media. And,
Mm-hmm.
we have that tendency to sit and everyone gets really invested in a major tournament and then the interest dies down a little bit. And it always will. Of course it
Mm-hmm.
will, tournaments rule the roost. But yeah, I just want to see people invest in it 24/7, 365 days a year.
For sure. We always talk about investment and kind of that investment coming from clubs, but the fan investment and the fan showing up, and like you highlighted, the fan culture in the women's game right now is very special. It's, if anything, it should draw fans in more into the game and to be able to see and interact how those players are on the pitch. Obviously, not every game is going to be at the home stadiums or the smaller stadiums. You could say I'm hoping to see more games in the men's stadiums. They're obviously very, very expensive to host at a big stadium or the main stadium, whether that be the Emirates or if it's the Tottenham Stadium, whatever it may be. Do you want to see? I guess the debate here is, should we be hosting more games in the men's stadiums, or should we be assuring that those games happening at the original stadiums, the smaller ones, are selling out before we move on to that? Is it kind of we'll never get an answer, or is this hopefully, I mean, we saw the major ticket sales, and Arsenal was a big massive push to that last season, but with this season again off the back of a World Cup, what should we be prioritizing, or what would you want to see the WSL prioritize in terms of making sure that those fans are showing up consistently? And I guess there's no right answer for this either. It's kind of a debate in the air.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's anything wrong with how we have it at the minute. I think we do need to prioritize selling out the stadiums that they use regularly. I mean, look, some clubs obviously do use the main stadiums every week, which
Hmm.
is great. Like obviously Bristol City are going to be playing at their main stadium every week. They're not going to sell it out, of course they're not.
Yeah.
We play at our main stadium at Sheffield United, Reading play at their main stadium,
Mm.
Birmingham City play at their main stadium. We're not going to sell it out, but we love having it because the facilities are great, the changing rooms are great, everything's great, and
Hmm.
it's a professional environment for the players. But yeah, I think for your big teams, certainly your Chelsea's, Arsenal's, Man Cities that play at sort of modestly sized stadiums, then yeah, we need to sell those out every single week because if we can't be getting 3 or 4 thousand in to watch a team like Chelsea for what, a tenner, something like
Hmm.
that, then we need to ask ourselves some questions about what we're doing. I've nothing against the big games in the big stadiums and things like that,
Hmm.
but charge for it. I think we're past the days of just giving tickets away for free, and
Mm.
that's the problem you get. People say, "Oh, it's sold out." Like people are saying tomorrow, England's sold out. It probably won't end up being full because tickets are so cheap. People can just afford to say, "I've got something else on," or "I just don't
Yeah.
fancy it." And we need to put a value on it. We don't need to price people out 100%. We don't want to go down the route of the men's game where a lot of people are priced out, but I do think we still undervalue it potentially because there's a sort of fear of maybe pushing on and moving on and sort of saying, okay, well, tickets are now going to be £20 or something like that.
Hmm.
But again, it's investment. Clubs need to start making money because a
Yeah.
lot of them are losing money at the moment. And, like you say, it's expensive to put games on, like especially in a big stadium, it costs thousands. So yeah, if you're only selling your tickets for £1,
Yeah.
that's why you're losing money. So
Mm.
it's a double-edged sword. I think you get dragged into that culture where a lot of course times are tough at the moment. There's a
Mm.
cost of living crisis going on for everybody, and
Yeah.
people, not everyone has a huge amount of disposable income. Another element of that is a big part of the women's football audience are young people,
Sure.
are teenagers who probably don't have lots of money and spend what they can going to watch their team. And like I said, we don't want to price people out, but we do need to progress forward. And I think we're getting stuck in that culture now of things have been free for so long or so cheap for so long. People have got so used to that now.
Hmm.
So I think we do need to move on with that. We need to do it slowly and progressively, but we do need to move on with it because it is a business at the end of the day, whether people like it or not. Football, any sport is a business. It has to make money. It has to be sustainable. If it doesn't start making money, it will crash and burn.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, look, I've nothing against the big games in big stadiums. I think they're
But
great and they're great for fans and they're great for players. But I think we're a long way away from having Arsenal play at the Emirates every week or Chelsea playing at Stamford
mhm.
Bridge every week. I don't think we need that yet.
Yeah.
And I don't think we're in that position yet. So
Hmm.
I don't think we're a million miles off. I think it can happen in the future, but
Yeah.
I
It's
think
baby
certainly,
steps.
yeah, I think, look, until you're selling out your your actual stadium every week, then we can maybe start having that conversation. Um,
Absolutely.
and again, it comes down to people, get out there, support your team. And like I said, it is that catch-22 situation where you do want to put prices up and you do want to charge for more things because you need to start making a profit. But people have got so used to it being a certain way that, where it's like people don't necessarily like change. So
Yeah.
glad I'm not the one making those decisions.
Definitely very tough decisions, but it is the whole motto of value it, but don't overprice it. And the challenge is finding that sweet spot. Speaking of challenges, it's going to be a very interesting challenge. Whoever wins the title, we always say it's going to go down to the wire. It's almost like the same statement every single season that this is going to be the closest season, but it does feel like every upcoming season is going to be the closest season. who do you think is going to snatch it? Given the reinforcements, the World Cup players, maybe some rested, others not so much. I think that'll be a fun convo that will come out later on in the season. But who do you think will be crowned the WSL champion and whenever the end of the season occurs?
Yeah, I mean, I know I've boringly sort of gone out already and said Chelsea, but
Yeah.
like they're just so established in what they do. And like I said at the start, they go out and go, right, okay, we've done this, right, we're going to sign so and so and so and so. So yeah, I think to do what they do and then go and sign players like Macario and Ashley Lawrence and Mia Fischel and they're planning for the future as well. They've brought in young players,
Mm-hmm.
Shoka Nuskin from Germany. So yeah, it's hard to look past them. I think it will be close. Don't get me wrong. I think look, all the other three are capable, and Man United have signed a little bit erratically in how they've done it, but they've signed good players that I think will move them forward, like Miyazawa, like JC, like Mallard on loan. They'll add real quality to that attack. Um, I do think Man City will do well because they haven't changed a lot. They were getting there last season.
Mm-hmm.
They should hit the ground running because they've barely changed anything bar one player. I think Arsenal have added in some key areas. I think they're still a little bit short, maybe at the back. Um, but they've got Beth Mead to come back in, Miedemar to come back in, and maybe more towards the end of the season, Leah Williamson to come back in. But they've got a chance. Obviously, it'd be interesting to see how Russo fits into how they want to play.
Yeah.
Um, but I don't see any of the teams that are as complete as Chelsea. I don't. I still see holes in Man United. I see holes in Arsenal. I see holes in Man City that I just don't see in Chelsea. I just see them go out every year and get stronger and stronger. And whether they can go and challenge in the Champions League, that's another story.
Mm-hmm.
But I think they're going to be hard to stop. I mean, I hope someone
Yeah.
at least has a good go. Obviously last year it went down to the final day, which was great.
Mm-hmm.
Even if it was always likely that Chelsea were going to win it, given they were playing Reading.
Right.
But yeah, just I just hope we see, it'd be great to see all three of them give them a go, and we have a four-way title race because the last few years there's always been one that has started a little bit slower than the rest, and it's hard in this league to make that up. Like there's only 22 games.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I just can't look beyond Chelsea at the moment.
No, I think that is a common feeling. Like it is a massive statement to go achieve a double, do what they did in the Champions League, which I thought was a brilliant run off the Champions League before, where they were knocked out in the group stages, and then go out and get Ashley Lawrence before the World Cup starts, Macario, and then Fischel afterwards. Like it is massive statements, and like you mentioned, they're a complete team and have been proven to be just that. So it'll be very interesting. I also do hope it is a four-way race where it really goes down to the wire between not just one or two teams, but you're talking about multiple ones that can finish in that first spot. And likewise with the Champions League qualifiers, that is also a conversation this year, and I feel like that will be even a bigger conversation next year because we won't. I mean, United still have a qualifier against PSG, but it'll also be interesting to see if it's just one English club who makes it through. But that is for a separate topic, like you mentioned. Rich, I'm afraid we are slightly short on time, but you've already crushed it this summer. You're probably going to continue to crush it both at Sheffield and a lot of the writing now with the WSL in England. I'll be leaving a lot of your Substack, obviously, and Twitter down below. But for the new followers that are probably heading your way or just listen to you, what are they expecting from you this season or possibly from when they hop onto your Twitter?
Uh, Hopefully lots of good things. I
That's
don't
the
even know
plan.
my I don't even know myself half the time. Like I just really like exploring the big, the stories, the features, the stuff that I think doesn't get talked about a lot.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's an audience for that. I think obviously the national newspapers who do a great job sort of focus on the mainstream and the big players and the big clubs. I think the one thing I've learned in 10 years of the women's game is there's just an incredible amount of interesting stories out there that haven't been told because there just hasn't been that sort of wider media coverage over the last 10, 20, 30 years. So yeah, I like to have a worldwide view and go really in depth in the stories and the features and the interviews. So yeah, it's what I've done for 10 years. So I think I'll carry on that way. But yeah, it's gonna be a good season, and I've no doubt. So before we even know it, we'll be talking about the Olympics and things like that
Yeah.
because the seasons just they go so quick.
They do go very, very quick. As an avid reader of a lot of Rich's work, I can assure you there's a lot of niche stories and stories that you probably weren't even aware in the women's game that have massively impacted the women's game that you currently watch that are of such interest reading and kind of important characters that are very you probably need to know them in the sport. So Rich, I'll be leaving a lot of your stuff down below, folks. Definitely head down there. Seasons are kicking off, Champions League again kicking off. There's a lot of stuff that's kicking off. You want to have your media prepared and who you'll be following up. So Rich should be on that list. Rich, massively appreciate you joining me here today. And yeah, hopefully cheers to a really good season.
Yeah, no worries. Thanks for having me as ever.